All right, welcome back, grade 10s. Yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, you'll get more time in a moment if you need more time on that source, but this is kind of the halfway point of today's class. So I'd like to update what we're doing in the second half. So, first half of today's class was all about assignment 1, and I need to remind you that in terms of writing, we have 2 assignments in the Dash 1 stream. We have the A1 and the A2. A2 is an essay, and we're about to look at that. And A1 is the source interpretation, where ultimately I'll package 3 sources together. One could be a cartoon, one might be a quote, one might be a graph or a map, and I'll ask you to do what you were doing for the first half of today's class, interpreting some sources. And this is the beginning of a long journey together that will continue to do A1 and A2 skill development and practice throughout the rest of this year and into 20 and into 30. So there's 2 main writing assignments that we want you to focus in on. And this morning, this first part of this afternoon's class, you ended up working on the first half of an A1. So now I'd like to introduce you to A2, an essay. So in order to introduce you to this, in lesson 6, we have a sample prompt, and then we have a sample outline. And with regards to the sample prompt, we have a sample introduction. And then we have some full essays as well. And then we ultimately have an essay to give you something to work on. That, my friends, is the first essay of the year. The strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. That's the beginning of the first essay of the year. Yes, sir?
How many essays are we going to be doing?
We are going to be doing this essay twice, and then one different essay on the final exam that looks a lot like it. So you could argue we only really do 2 essays, but we're going to be exploring this essay, and we're going to make it more complicated and more complicated. So the beginning of it is the strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. Then we're going to add something about globalization, provides a mirror into the nature of mankind. And then ultimately we're going to add something from related issue 3 and 4 about the destruction of the planet and the fragile remains. So we're going to do with A2 like we're doing with A1. We're going to go through it a little bit by little bit, step by step. So today, being the last day before a long weekend, I wanted to get you thinking about this essay, because it is something we were writing all year. I want you to start thinking about the theme of this essay. So in order to get you to think about the theme, I had you read over some sample essays that are similar. Some are identical to this prompt. That's to give you some kind of inspiration, but also give you some guidance. There's nothing more frustrating than having an assignment and you're like, well, I don't know what he wants. So hopefully by the end of this course, you'll be like, at least I know what an A1 and an A2 is meant to look like. And now I just have to have the content to put in. So, in terms of the A2, we have this practice prompt. Globalization provides a window into the unimaginative nature of mankind. It is clear we are nothing more than violent, irrational, exploitive creatures, limited by our own jealousy and greed. So the first step on an essay is called an analysis of the source. That's what the introduction includes. So we have an introduction, but it's kind of like a separate step. We have to analyze the source before we can respond to it. So we don't take a position until at the end of our analysis. And if you don't have an analysis, if you just jump into your position, you do get a 0. So it's important to understand that there's this other step in an essay. It's an analysis of the source, and it's almost identical to what we're doing in an A1. So in an A1, we're breaking down details within a source. We're talking about an ideological perspective. We're talking about problems that it's exposing, solutions that it's We can infer that it's promoting. We talk about values and assumptions, significance and division of society. All of these things we do here as well. So there's a reason we started with the A1 before we did the A2. It's because there's some transferable skills. There's some steps that we did with the A1 that we can do here as well. So here's a satisfactory introduction that's kind of taking this and analyzing it. So a subject of much controversy is the nature of mankind. The first sentence here is introducing the theme of the source. So broad as possible, most broad-based as possible, it's like, here's what it is. And then we jump into the ideological perspective shown in the source. What is it doing? It highlights our flawed human nature. So we talk about the theme, we talk about the perspective, and then we talk about the inspiration. Where's this perspective coming from? This could be inspired by the critique of our sinful nature. Mankind is subject to flaws such as greed, and that's right here in the source. Desire, gluttony, jealousy, glory, power, and anger. Sadly, these things have been shown in case studies such as Hitler's Germany. So we say it has been inspired by these things, and here's some evidence to further the perspective. And that's one of the steps that you did on an A1. Here's some evidence that you could use to further the perspective. Here, that sentence looks like this. Sadly, these things have been shown in case studies such as Hitler's Germany. That's the evidence to further the perspective. Wars in general, the oppressive rule of dictators, and our regretful past, including slave ownership. These flaws, like catalysts in general, have appeared to speed up change. But what is the nature of this change? So sometimes you can ask a question so that you can continue to unpack what you are, in this case, analyzing, the source. The source suggests that this change is destructive. So we're going back to the source. We're saying, you know what? This is saying that change is bad. It's destructive. Therefore, the ideological perspective shown here is, got to link it back to globalization, critical of globalization. And maybe intending, so what's the intention? What's the purpose of this source? Intending to convince us through self-analysis to change our sinful nature. Or in the least, warn us about the dangerous consequences about human relations. So all of this part, up to that last sentence, is analyzing this. And then we respond to it. The last sentence of your intro, the last sentence of your analysis, is your thesis. And your thesis is your argument that you're going to defend afterwards. And the thesis here says, although human nature is flawed, it is not the only catalyst for change. Therefore, we can have both destructive and productive change. So we analyze the source, and then we respond to it by taking a position. Yes, sir?
What is a catalyst in the content?
A catalyst is just something that causes change. It's a spark. So, this is a sample introduction for this prompt to just give you an exemplar. This is not the prompt we're working with. We're working with something that's going to be a continuation of this. So what you can do over the weekend is think about, to what extent is this true? See if you can see evidence that the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. Look in the contemporary world. Look into the literature that you've enjoyed in your lifetime and said, is this a theme that I've seen, or is it wrong? Is this not how we interconnect? So globalization is the interconnectedness of mankind. This source is saying when we globalize, the strong do whatever they want, and the weak suffer. Is that what happens when we globalize? Do we see weak people suffering and strong doing whatever they want? If so, you're going to agree with the source. If not, you're going to disagree. So this is a part of the source you're going to get at, and here is another analysis. So you can see this analysis is a little bit longer. The world is not an equal place. So that's the theme of the source, right? The strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. The world is not an equal place, nor is history a story that celebrates, those who are mediocre, right? Many have contemplated to what extent is it natural or even justified for the strong to feed on the weak. Although the source is a quote accredited to an ultimatum sent from the mighty Athenians to intimidate the vulnerable and neutral Melians during the Peloponnesian Wars. So that sentence says, you know what? I did a Google search and I know where the quote's from. I know the context. The continued significance, and that's another step here. Why should we care? What's the significance of the source? The continued significance of this concept can be discovered when one looks at the plethora of death and destruction that has been committed by those following the social Darwinistic logic. So what we've done there is we've taken the quote, the strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must, and we said, what kind of ideology is this? And it's social Darwinism. So we're identifying it as an ideology. We're saying this is social Darwinism. The issue is complicated as we explore the language used in defense of the strong. Firstly, we need to establish what does it mean to be strong. So much like with an A1, we have to dissect the nuances what we have. Here, the nuances are just words. So we have to break the words down. It says the strong do what they can. So in order to get this correct, we have to say, well, what does it mean to be strong? So firstly, we need to establish what does it mean to be, quote, strong. This term, depending upon which era of history you're in, may refer to one's military might, strength of the economy, connection to God, attractiveness of your ideology, or even individual characteristics like charisma or genetics. Naturally, we define the weak. We tend to discover groups of people lacking the qualities accredited above to the strong. Put simply, the strong are the haves and the weak are the have-nots. So what have we done in that section of the analysis? We defined the key terms. But we didn't just say the dictionary defines strong as this. That's a straightforward, that's an S. We try to think a little more sophisticatedly, right? The source suggests that those characteristics as the strong do what they can. In history, this has meant that the strong have plundered, pillaged, raped, colonized, assimilated, and eradicated those who are the weak. Although that list does identify types of suffering, the source also provides reason for the suffering. They, the weak, must. We're breaking down the language. Although the source doesn't state why the weak must suffer, we can infer that they suffer because they are not the strong. The logic shows an application of the theory behind social Darwinism that celebrates natural selection, the law of the jungle, and the survival of the fittest. Obviously, this is a controversial topic, as not everyone agrees that the strong should feed on the weak. Beyond the obvious crowd of the weak that should, but probably are unable to protest their exploitation, many may point to the immoral consequences of the logic presented by the source. So that's talking about the significance, the division of society, the controversy. And then finally, here's the thesis. Although the strong may have the power to do what they want, and this practice may appear to be natural, it is not justified to feed on the weak. Relationships that result from globalization should be based on mutual benefits. So, we'd like you to leave here today knowing a little bit about the theme of the essays we're going to be writing this year. You can get that by reading over the sample essays, but also starting to think about this topic, the strong feeding on the weak. So, I'm going to give you a little bit more time again to read over the essays, to finish up your paragraph, and then we have some canned lectures of mine on essay writing that we're going to begin to look at. Any questions before we dive back in? So you're finishing your paragraph, you're reading the sample essays. If you're like, man, I'm done both of those now, well, you have the beginning of an essay topic. We know the first theme. The strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. That's the first pillar of your essay. So then you can begin to flush it out and say, do I understand what it means? Do I understand the context? What is social Darwinism? What is survival of the fittest? What is natural selection? How does it fit to globalization historically? How does it fit to globalization today? how might it fit the globalization in the next 50 years? These are things that you could do some research on, as we have the luxury of having Chromebooks today. So, I'm going to say about 2:30, I'm going to interrupt you again, and we'll watch a canned lecture of mine on how to write essays. Any questions? All right, enjoy.